In this video, I'll explain why deep communication is not a talent, but a discipline. And at the end, I'll give you 5 practical techniques I've personally used to turn a short conversation into the beginning of a great friendship. Subscribe, and let's bring back the true art of human conversation. Imagine this scene. You're sitting across from someone you haven't seen in a long time. There's time, there's an opportunity, but silence. The words won't come out. And not because you have nothing to say, no, but because you don't know how to say it sincerely, without cliches, without prepackaged lines, without filters. We live in a world where words have become cheap. There are too many of them, way too many, but how few of them are real. And that's the paradox of our time. We've never had so many communication channels and yet such a shortage of real contact, deep, honest, human. How many times have you felt they don't hear me, or worse, I don't know how to reach them? Sounds familiar, right? I've been there too. There was a time when my words came out but had no weight. I could talk for hours and still feel like a stranger. And only later did I understand, real communication doesn't begin with what you say, but with who you are. Once at a seminar I said, don't work on becoming a better speaker. Work on becoming someone worth listening to. And someone in the audience raised their hand and asked, Jim, how do you do that? The answer is simple and at the same time difficult. It's not about techniques. It's about a philosophy of communication, about attitude, about character. I didn't learn this in university. And not from books. I learned it in real life when I was still a farm boy from Idaho, afraid to approach a stranger and say anything more than hi. At 25, I hit rock bottom. No money, no prospects, shattered self-esteem. And worst of all, I lost trust in myself. And you know what started it all? One simple conversation. My friend invited me to a talk by Earl Schoaf. And for the first time in my life, I felt these words didn't just hit my head, they touched my heart. He spoke simply, but in a way that every phrase left a mark. And that's when I realized communication isn't about effects, persuasion, or speaking louder. It's about creating a space where another person can entrust you with the most important things, their thoughts, their doubts, their hopes. It's about building a bridge, not grabbing the mic. Today I want to talk to you about just that, about the power of meaningful conversation, about how to not just respond but resonate, how to not just listen but truly hear, how to not just be interesting, but be close. It's both an art and a science. But the good news is, anyone can learn it. Even if today you feel like, I'm not good at speaking, I have no charisma, I don't know what to say, that's just a signal, not a sentence. The thing is, the skill of deep communication is not a gift, but a choice. It's how you look at a person, how you ask questions, how you hold a pause, how you resist interrupting when you want to, how you see, not just hear, and all of that can be trained. More than that, it should be trained, because right here, in our everyday conversations, is where partners, friends, teams, families, ideas, and healing are born. I often say at my talks, people don't change their lives because of information, they change them through conversation. That one conversation after which you walk away a different person. And not because you were convinced, but because you were touched. So today I invite you on a journey not through tricks and techniques, although there will be some, but deeper into how real conversation changes the course of things. We'll talk about how to become someone people want to talk to longer, about the power of silence, about the rhythm of speech, about micro gestures that speak louder than words. And at the end, I'll give you 5 practical techniques tested by me in real halls, offices, restaurants, phone calls, and even at funerals. Because it's in life's most difficult moments that true communication is revealed, not as a form, but as an essence. Subscribe if you want to learn not just to persuade, but to touch. Not just to answer, but to build trust. Not just to carry a conversation, but to carry a person. Because in a time when everyone is speaking loudly, the greatest strength lies in a quiet, attentive word. And now, let's go deeper. Conversation as a bridge, not a microphone. The power of listening and presence. Let's start with the simplest and at the same time the hardest skill, the ability to listen. Not to hear, but to truly listen, because the difference between the two is like looking at a photo and touching a real person. I've often said, don't speak to reply, listen to understand. And you know, that sounds easy, but try next time not to interrupt when your conversation partner says something you disagree with. Try not to formulate your answer in your head before they've even finished their sentence. Oh, that's a real test of inner strength. I didn't learn this right away. Back when I was a young business consultant, I thought that if I quickly said something clever, people would respect me. Sometimes I even interrupted clients, thinking I knew the answer before they'd finished asking the question. But one meeting changed everything. It was with an older gentleman, the head of a company, who invited me to his office for a consultation. We sat down, and he began sharing his story slowly, with pauses. I, as usual, took notes and was just about to interrupt to offer a solution, but he stopped me with a simple hand gesture and said, "Jim, I don't want you to fix me. I want you to understand me." That shook me, because suddenly I realized I wasn't listening to him as a person. I was listening as a technician, as someone who would fix things, but not as someone who would walk alongside him. From that moment, I started building my philosophy of conversation, not as a transfer of information, but as the creation of space. Yes, space where the other person feels heard not only with the ears, but with the heart, because it's in such conversations that trust opens up, and from trust, transformation begins. People often ask me, "Jim, what's the secret to your effect on the audience? Why do people cry, laugh, and write down every word after your speeches?" And I reply, I never speak to an audience. I speak to each person in it. I try to be with them in the moment, to be attentive, to be present. You know, there's one skill you can start developing right now. It's slow silence. When your conversation partner has just said something important, don't rush to respond. Leave 2-3 seconds of silence. That pause works like magic. It says, "I really heard that. It matters to me." And often after that silence, people add what they truly meant to say, the real thought, the hidden emotion. We live in a world of fast replies, but deep conversations aren't born in a rush. They're like old wine. They need time, respect, presence. One of my friends, a psychologist from California, once told me, "Jim, most people don't even hear themselves. But you gave them a chance to be heard, and that's why they remember you." And I want you to have that too. For your dialogues to be not just exchanges of information, but bridges being built. Because when a person feels truly heard, they change, and they want to listen in return. There was a guy I knew, a salesman from a small town. He told me, "Jim, I don't speak beautifully like you. What should I do?" I said, "Don't worry about the words. Work on your attitude. If you genuinely care about the client, the words will come. But if you're only thinking about the sale, people will feel it before you even open your mouth." Real communication is always about the heart's tone. Even the simplest "how are you" can sound like a formality or like a hug, and it's those word hugs that create real bonds. And one more thing, when you speak, allow yourself to be simple. Don't try to impress, instead try to connect. Simplicity is a sign of mastery. I've said this many times, a true speaker isn't the one who speaks complexly, but the one who a child understands and an adult remembers. So, friends want deeper connections? Start by truly listening. Want to be heard? Speak not to sound smart, but to connect. And remember, every conversation is either construction or destruction. And as we speak about this, in the second part, I'll show you how simple phrases I've used in conversations created trust even with the most closed-off people. But first, recall one conversation that changed you. Did you think of it? That's your proof. A conversation isn't a sound, it's a destiny. And that's just the beginning. From here, we go even deeper. Words that stay, how to speak. So people remember you for a lifetime. I remember one evening in Denver. It was a business event. I was the last speaker, following a long lineup of others. A woman in her 60s approached me. Her eyes were shining. She took my hand and said, "Mr. Rohn, you don't know this, but 25 years ago you said a phrase I wrote down in my journal. And from that day on, I read it every morning. It helped me build my business and save my marriage." I remembered that phrase. When you change, everything you touch changes. Simple? Yes, but sincere. And said at the right moment, it became a turning point. That's the key, not just to speak, but to speak at the moment when a word becomes a pivot. and it's not about magic formulas, it's about authenticity. That's why I've always said, don't search for perfect words, become the perfect conversation partner. Let's go back to my first year with Earl Schaff. I didn't yet know I'd become a speaker, I was just listening. And what struck me wasn't how much he knew, but how he could say one thing, and it landed on your heart. For example, it's not the income you earn, Jim, it's the person you become to earn it. Back then I didn't grasp the depth, but the words stayed. And each year I came back to them in a new light. I understood. Words spoken from true experience outlive us. Now imagine, how many of those words do you already have? How many phrases from your own experience could become a turning point for someone else if you say them at the right moment? And for that to happen, you must be more than a speaker. You must be a seer. In a conversation, what matters most isn't what's said, but noticing the unease in the other person. Seeing the moment when someone needs support, and not saying everything will be fine, but saying, I'm with you, I've been there too. That's not a technique, that's empathy in action. It works in business too. One of my favorite examples is from when I was training salespeople. I'd say, before you sell anything, ask yourself, does this person want to be heard or do they just want a price? And most often they want to be heard. And when you say, tell me, why are you looking for this? The person opens up, and then the communication shifts to a level of trust. And trust is the best business partner. You never know which of your phrases will stay with someone for years. But here's the secret. The deeper your connection with your own experience, the deeper you'll touch others. I've had moments when I shared my pain. When I told an audience, I too sat there with no money. I too had debts. But you know why I'm here? Because one day I said, enough. And the silence in the room said more than any applause. People don't seek superheroes, they seek what's real. I'm not afraid to talk about my failures because they're what made me interesting. I often repeated that phrase, and maybe you should too. Don't hide your stories, don't try to sound flawless. Conversations aren't about impressing, they're about resonating. Now let's talk rhythm. Each of us has our own internal pace of speaking, but more important is the pace of presence. When you talk to someone, try not to rush. Tune into the pace at which the person receives your words. If they're slow, slow down. If they're emotional, give them space. One phrase helped me a lot. Conversation is a dance, not a competition. And like in dancing, you don't drag your partner, you feel them. You lead but with respect. You speak, but not to overpower. Sometimes the wisest thing is not to speak at all. I once had a conversation with a young man who had just lost his business. He came to me for advice, and instead of speeches, I simply sat beside him in silence. A few minutes passed silence. Then I said, "This isn't the end. It's a reminder that you are more than your failure." He quoted those 10 words to me 10 years later. Now let me ask you a question. Have there been conversations in your life that you still remember? Phrases that hit you? People who made you want to live better, think deeper, love more sincerely? If yes, that means words have power, but only when they carry something real. In part 3, I'll show you how to transform ordinary conversations into living transformations through the language of emotion, the right questions, and nonverbal signals. And at the end, as promised, I'll give you 5 techniques you can use today in a conversation with a friend, a partner, a client, even with yourself. In the meantime, remember, the depth of connection isn't in the complexity of speech, but in the purity of heart. Speak not just with words, speak with intention, and people will remember you for a long time. Touching with words, how to build deep connections. Through questions, emotions, and inner presence. I first realized the power of a simple question when I was 26. I was still young, a beginner in business, and I met a man who made a huge impression on me. He was a potential mentor, a company owner. I tried to impress him. I talked about myself, my ambitions, my plans. He listened silently, attentively, without interrupting. And then he asked one single question, "Jim, what are you most afraid of?" It wasn't a typical question. It wasn't meant to get a quick answer. It opened me up. It stopped me in my tracks. I didn't know what to say. But right then, for the first time, I stopped thinking about what I was saying and started thinking about what was really happening inside me. That was a real conversation, the kind that changes you not because it gives you answers, but because it asks the right question. And that's when I understood. A smart person impresses with answers. a wise one with questions. From that point on, I started working on the art of asking questions. Questions that go deep, questions that say, I'm not here to fix you, I'm here to understand you. At seminars, I often started with a simple one. Who will you become if everything stays the same for the next 5 years? It's not aggression, it's a mirror. People would stay silent longer after that than after any advice. Here's the thing, deep communication isn't about eloquence. It's about creating an inner dialogue in your conversation partner. And that's what good questions do, without pressure, without the I know better tone. Questions with respect, and silence afterward. But that's just one part of the equation. The second is emotional presence. How do you respond? Can you read on someone's face when they're no longer speaking with words but with their soul? In those moments, it's not time to be clever. It's time to be human. I remember a moment, a woman at an event raised her hand and said, Mr. Rohn, I lost my husband this summer, and I don't know how to go on. Silence. The whole room froze. I didn't give an answer. I simply stood up, walked over to her, took her hand and said, I don't know how you feel right now, but I know you're not alone. That is communication, not language, presence. Sometimes to touch someone, you don't need to speak. You need to be there. You know, I've often seen people try to impress others with fancy vocabulary, flashy examples, facts, but then someone simple yet real walks in and everyone goes quiet. Why? Because the energy of authenticity speaks louder than perfect diction. I realized this on my path as a speaker. In the early years, I worried before going on stage, worried if I'd sound smart enough, but over time I learned, people don't come to judge you, they come to, through you, reconnect with themselves. Here's a small secret. Allow yourself to be open first. Share your failures, doubts, pains. That's not weakness. That's the key to someone else's soul. People open up to those who aren't afraid to be vulnerable. If you want to build deep connections, don't be afraid to bare your heart with words. Say, I've made mistakes too. I was afraid to start too. I thought I'd never be able to do it too. And in those phrases is a bridge between you and others, a bridge not built with arguments, but with the pure intention of being there. Right now, many seek influence techniques, but I'll teach you something else, techniques of presence. Look into someone's eyes, not to control, but to understand. Pause, not because you don't know what to say, but to give space. Ask not, what did you do, but how did that feel? It's all simple. But in simplicity lies the deepest truth. I say this from experience. I've spoken with all kinds of people, millionaires, homemakers, students, the discouraged, and all of them wanted one thing to be heard. Not judged, not corrected, just seen. So my friend, if you want to change the world, start with one conversation. Speak not to convince, but to uplift. Listen not to respond, but to feel. And be not the one who impresses, but the one remembered years later. Because here's the simple truth. Real connections aren't a coincidence. They are a result of chosen tone, chosen intonation, and most of all, a chosen heart. And in the next part, as promised, I'll give you 5 questions that will help you create a conversation they'll never forget. We'll do some interactive work. So get ready, because true transformation begins next. And it won't start with a phrase, it will start with you. And now what I promised from the very beginning. Let's move to practice. But before we start, let me ask you, have you ever been in a conversation, looked someone in the eyes, and suddenly realized something real is happening right now? That's no coincidence. That's the result of deep questions. And now I want to give you 5 questions I've been using for decades. These are not just phrases, they are keys to another person's inner world, and to your own as well. Your task right now is not to listen like it's a lecture. Listen like it's a challenge. Feel them. Evaluate yourself from 1 to 10. 1, not true for me at all. 10, that's absolutely me. Ready? Let's go. First question. How sincerely do I listen to people without already thinking about what I'll say next? This is one of the most powerful questions in the world of communication, because most of us listen, just waiting for our turn to speak. But real listening is when you disappear and only the other person remains. So 1 or 10, be honest. Second question. When was the last time I asked someone, how are you really? Not just how's it going, not small talk, the real version, with a pause and space for the answer. If you can't remember, it's time to change that, because this is the kind of question that creates memorable moments. Third question, do people feel stronger after talking to me? Oh, this one's big, because you can speak intelligently and still drain someone, or speak simply and leave them with wings. If your conversations give others clarity, hope, energy, you're a communicator by spirit. Where are you now on that scale? Fourth question, do I share my own stories or hide behind facts? We're afraid to admit what hurt us, but that's exactly where the connection is. In vulnerability, there's a bridge. Talking about how you got up, that's inspiring, but talking about how you fell, that's bonding. Fifth question, can I create a pause where others are used to rushing? A pause is not silence, it's space. It's an act of respect. Sometimes 1 second of silence speaks more than 5 minutes of a speech. A pause says, I'm not here to win the conversation, I'm here to be with you. And now I invite you to do the following. You don't have to score anyone else, only yourself. Go back through each question and give yourself an honest answer. This isn't a test, it's a mirror. But most importantly, don't stop at the score. Choose one question, the one that hit you the hardest. And for the next 3 days, practice it in every conversation. Maybe it'll be the pause, maybe the honest question, maybe a story you've held back for too long. Communication is not a skill for the stage, it's a tool for life. And you're already wise enough to build deep connections. And if this video was valuable to you, subscribe. Not just because I'm asking, but because there's more like this ahead. And maybe the next video will be your turning point. One more thing, leave a comment. Which of the 5 questions made you think the most? Share it. That's also the start of a deep conversation. Because remember, the world doesn't change from words. It changes from the heart those words carry. We began with something simple, how to speak so you're heard. But in truth, we went deeper. We touched the core, how to be the kind of person someone wants to stay in conversation with. Not because of eloquent phrases, but because of presence, because of attention, because of authenticity. Because let's remember, in a world where everyone talks, the one who truly listens becomes a leader. The one who asks deeply becomes a friend. And the one who knows when to stay silent is remembered for years. I've always said, success isn't income, it's the quality of your relationships, because through them we influence, grow, and live fully. So if today's journey touched you even slightly, take it as an anchor point, and your next conversation might not be accidental, but transformational, because every word is a seed, and every moment of your presence is the soil. Plant deeply, speak from the heart, and the world will respond in kind.